Kevin Godley. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
What?
I hope.
Where are you coming to us from right now?
I am in Ireland.
Okay, what time is it there?
It is 9 o'clock in the evening.
And it's that? Are you indoors?
I am in a few doors. Yeah, I'm in in a conservatory where I live. So my workspace is a conservatory.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It looks very bright. I was just shocked.
It is. That's just a reflection of the God that you're seeing, I think.
Gotcha. So yeah, thank you so much. Where are you originally from? You're from a place called Prestwich, England, right?
Yeah, which is part of Manchester, essentially.
Okay.
North of England.
What'd your parents do when you were a kid?
My parents, my dad was a businessman and had a bunch of shops in the centre of Manchester selling all sorts of stuff, from musical instruments to records to tape recorders to radios, cameras, all that kind of stuff, and camping equipment for some bizarre reason. And my mum was just my mum.
She was a stay-at-home mom?
Yeah.
Now, so were you ever interested in going into, obviously you said he's selling all this musical equipment and camping equipment as well, but specifically, did you want to go into being just like a traditional businessman at any point?
Absolutely not.
That was never an interest.
Well, no, not remotely. I mean, it was my dad's interest. He wanted me to be, and indeed I used to sort of help out in different shops on Saturday occasionally, but I fucking hated it. I did not like doing that. But it recently occurred to me that I ended up being in all those businesses anyway, somehow. Cameras, radios, tape recorders, musical instruments, which is kind of very bizarre. But no, I didn't want to be a businessman. I wanted to be an artist.
With all that equipment, did you have the opportunity as a kid? Like, was there stuff around the house that, maybe like leftover stuff from what he was selling that you got to play around with?
Not around the house. No, there was a basement at the music shop, which I used to sort of dive into every now and again, and found all manner of bizarre bits of instrumentation down there. And the first drum kit I ever owned was sort of cobbled together from bits of other drum kits that I hadn't sold in the shop. And I had, like a sort of red side tom-tom and a pearl snare and a different cymbal here and a cymbal, all from different bits, sort of a hybrid kit, which sounded like shit, but was wonderful briefly.
And were your parents okay with you? I mean, because a lot of parents don't want their kids to pick up any instrument, nevertheless, picking up the drums. And I'm a drummer myself, so I know that from personal experience. My parents are very supportive, but you know how it is. Were they okay with it?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really practice at home. I didn't really get into it until I was able to join a band, and then it became a little more serious. So I never actually practiced at home with anything other than practice pads or a cymbal and a snare. So I didn't actually deafen anybody at home.
Was that first band, was that Group 17 or is that before that?
No, I think it was Group 17. I have no idea why it was called Group 17 because none of us were 17. We're probably more like 15. So some weird code or something. I can't remember.
There wasn't 17 of you either?
No, there wasn't 17 of us. No, I think there were 3 or 4 of us, and we were terrible. And I was originally the bass player, actually, but I couldn't play bass to save my life. I graduated to drums so I could sit at the back and hammer things. It was much more satisfying, I found.
Was there anything else besides music once you got into drums and you said you were kind of, plucking on the bass? Were you interested in anything else? Was there any I'm into drumming, but I actually have this other hobby that I'm really good at. Was there anything like that? Or is it really just music at that point?
Well, I was a kid, I think kids back then, we're talking like late 1950s, early 1960s. Like most kids of my age, we were looking for a way out that wasn't what we were expected to do, if you know what I mean. I mean, you mentioned, did I want to go into the family business? No, I didn't, but my father anticipated me wanting to. But I the only other thing that I could do well was draw. I could draw things and spend a lot of time drawing. So I was artistically inclined. So on the one hand, I was a fledgling musician and songwriter. All the writing came later. On the other hand, I was drawing stuff. And I guess there was something inside me that was looking for a way to combine the two things because they were the only things that I could do. Life, I couldn't handle. Life was boring.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because back then, until maybe 63, 64, 65, if you were a preteen, there was no teenagers weren't really catered for, if you know what I mean. We were sort of the invisibles. And we didn't really mean anything until we became adults, and we were expected to be like our parents were to a degree. It was the beginning of the youth revolution, which I think probably began in your country more than mine. But it's like nobody knew not only what we were, but what we were supposed to be.
Were you a rebellious teen?
Was I what?
Were you like particularly rebellious as a teenager?
No, I was pretty quiet. I was inwardly rebellious. I was always looking for things to do artistically, but no, I wasn't physically rebellious particularly. Although one fell into a way of life. It's a funny thing when you're young, you want to be part of a group. I think you're not really looking for your own individuality. You need to associate with something that's going on in the world. And so I ended up going to art college, more than one art college, which kept me out of trouble for a while. But I got to talking to a bunch of people and working with a bunch of people and began to learn that things were changing around the world. And I identified with that.
How,
talking
when you
like the beat generation, for want of a better description of what was going on.
And do you consider yourself, you were artsy? Were you the kind of artsy where it was like, oh, he's so cool, he's into all of these things? Or was it more kind of like that nerdy type of artsy as a kid where you are, like you said, you are reserved, but there's a lot of people who they kind of use that in a way that it's hip, especially nowadays. Being that nerdy, artsy kind of kid is cool. Back then, did you feel that kind of way? Like, I'm unique?
I don't know. I was probably the guy that sat on the stairs, tapping the stairs as a drummer, as opposed to dancing at house parties. So I don't know whether I qualified for either of those. I was shy. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, other than I didn't really want to grow up. And I didn't want to grow up and become what I was expected to be. I knew that my future lay in some form of art. My parents suggested that I go to art college, but specifically to learn graphic design so that I could become a commercial artist, because that sounded like a proper job. Yeah, a graphic designer, essentially, which is what I did. I went to a few art colleges. But by then, I'd already sort of palled up with a neighbor of mine, Lol Creme, who was of a similar frame of mind, and we both ended up at two different art colleges, and we began to enjoy the student life.
How'd you feel about your parents suggesting going to graphic arts school? Was it on your end? Were you like, "Oh, this makes sense. I'm artsy. This is perfect," or did you kind of feel like they were pushing you towards something that you weren't really into?
No, I was thinking brilliant. Because I kind of knew that going to I knew that going to art college would be a good place to learn to become myself. And that was an instinct that was actually correct, because at the time things were happening at art college all over the place. It was quite a revolutionary place to be, regardless of which college you were at. There were all sorts of social changes going on at the time. And one became part of that, and you grew as a person into that, I think, and you began to understand what was possible.
How were you supporting yourself when you first went to college? Were you just were your
I
parents
had a
helping you
grant.
completely, or did you have any side jobs?
No, I had a grant. I mean, most students at that time had what's known as a grant. If you ended up being chosen to go to a particular college, you were given a small amount of money to live on, to pay your rent and to eat, which are the two
That's an
basic
important
things
one.
you kind of need. Yeah, I probably got a little bit of pocket money from my parents, but not much. So I was like any normal student, really.
Were
I
you
just got lost in the life.
were you hyper devoted to your classes when you were in college, or were you kind
No,
of
I
just
was awful.
really?
I was shit.
So you were
You
basically you
know,
were doing what you wanted to do, and the classes all came separate.
no, I did what I was supposed to do and nothing more, because I found after a while you can't really teach art. Um, Particularly during the formative years, you do lots of different kinds of art. You do sculpture, you do painting, and you learn the history of art. And they also give you projects to do, like design a book jacket for this book, design some branding, a logo for this particular product, and you do it. You don't know whether it's any good or not. But when you come out the other end, you they haven't really taught you to find your own style. They've produced somebody who has the basics to exist in that particular profession, if you like. And I left with a degree, graduated with a degree, which has been completely useless to me,
So then what?
because on the
Keep going.
sorry, on the day I left college, Lol Creme and I drove to London for a recording session. And I know I was at this particular college for a 3-year course,
So you were working.
which I passed.
Were you in bands as soon as you got to college, or was there kind of a period of time where you were just focusing on art specifically in the traditional sense?
No, I was doing the two at the same time, and being in a band. I think the band was called initially it was called Sabres, and then I joined another band called the Mockingbirds.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Mockingbirds, I was touring in a very shabby way. I'd do a day at the art college. I'd get picked up in a van, and we'd shoot off around England and do a gig. And I'd come back to my shabby little shack, wake up in the morning and go to college. It was like that maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So, and playing drums in a band and traveling around the UK in the back of a band was much more exciting than graphic design, as you
So
can imagine.
so you actually,
We were only playing at clubs, little clubs, but it was great.
but you were preferring over the like comfy traditional sense of I'm going to learn this and have a career in it. You were enjoying the kind of shabby cheapness, but it was the excitement is what you really enjoyed. You didn't care about the fact you weren't sitting there at the gigs going like, damn, it's 1 a.m. and I'm not getting any money. You weren't thinking about that. You were just enjoying it so much in the moment
No,
that it outweighed everything else.
absolutely. Absolutely. I was maybe probably about 17, 18, something. So my whole life was in front of me. But things were happening. A couple of things were enjoyable on different levels.
Mm-hmm.
But playing in front of a sweaty audience in a tiny club for an hour and a half, hammering away on a kit at the back in a rhythm and blues band was way more enticing than sitting at a desk designing a book jacket,
That's
where someone
true.
would come along and say, "Well, that's not too bad, Kevin. It'd be a little better if you tweaked it and added a little more red where you've got blue. It's not as exciting as yeah, you know." So I was actually drawn to that, but there was no plans. Nobody had any plans. It just happened. Stuff. If you've got something in you and you're making things that just a few people like in music back then, anyway, you and then, or at least it happened to me this way. People liked how I sung, how I played, And we somehow ended up going to London to make some recordings as my life as a graphic design student closed. And that was a blast.
How did you make
We'd
that
never been in
happen?
a problem. How did that happen? All the time I was at college, we started trying to write songs, not very good ones. And Graham Goulman, who was in 10cc, saw some promise in what we were doing and let us record some of these things as demos on his tape recorder. And some people got to hear them at some point. A guy called Giorgio Gomelsky, who had a record label called Marmalade, and he managed the Stones at some point. And he liked the stuff we were doing, and so we were invited to come down and record a couple of them for the Marmalade label. And that was a buzz. We'd never, at that stage, we'd never been in a real recording studio. So that was exciting.
And then, so
more so than graphics.
When you had met, you said you met Lol originally before college, right? He was your next door neighbor growing up?
Yeah.
So by the time you and Lol started working together, was it kind of apparent that basically everything that either of you do, in some form, you're going to be kind of conjoined at the hip because you guys just work so well together? Were you spending a lot of time working without each other, or by the time it was jointed, was it just kind of locked in no matter what you were doing?
We were pretty much joined at the hip. We'd sort of, we go through the week, we do our college work, we'd get together at home at the weekend and conjure up all manner of mad projects, some of which were musical, others were not musical. But we kind of felt that we had something worth following and worth trying. And we saw the world in a particular way. I think by then, the Beatles were happening. And we understood that anything was possible. At least that's how it felt back then. If these four guys from Liverpool came out of nowhere and could do this and were allowed to do this, then why can't we? And we were inspired by what they did and how successful they became at doing it. It was a real eye opener.
What do you think it was about you and Lol specifically that worked so well together? Was it just creatively? I almost said creatively. Creatively, was it? That's where
creatively. Probably creatively. Yeah,
I like that one.
Definitely, whatever that is. Yeah, creatively.
Creatively. Yeah. Look, I've done. This will be the 42nd episode of this show. It's like 50 something hours of me talking. If I could go back and find all the times that I've accidentally slurred my words or mixed something up, just statistically, it's bound to happen eventually,
You could probably put an episode out just of those cut together, I imagine. That would be very creatively.
It'd be a creative touch to do.
Forgive me if I'm all twitchy and blinky. I've been staring at a screen for longer than I can remember.
Well, I apologize that this is also
I'm starting to do my eyes in a bit, It's all right.
I start getting tunnel vision, to be honest, if I look at a screen too much.
Yeah. I was going to put dark glasses on, but then I'd look a total wanker, so I'm not going to do that.
Please look like a wanker. I would appreciate that. Would be awesome.
Please look like a wanker. Okay. I can't find my dark glasses. Okay.
But I was gonna say, so was it the creative part of each of your guys' minds that worked so well together, or was it just personally you guys got along? Because I have a lot of friends of mine who I think creatively we lock in, but it's really it's our personalities that kind of separate it, because we're really good being friends, but something about working can kind of cause that tension. What was it about you two you think that worked so well where you guys could lock in on so many different things?
We complemented each other somehow. We filled in the gaps that the other person didn't have, and we thought about the world in similar ways. And we were in our own little bubble. I don't think anybody that we knew quite thought about what was going on the way we did. So we had a kind of dual identity. if that made any sense. So we were friends. I mean, I met Lol in a very odd way anyway. I was trying to make a little film when I was a kid, 8mm film of Dracula. I'd borrowed a camera from my dad's shop, 8mm camera, and I was looking for someone to play Igor the Hunchback. Not that there was one in Dracula, but I thought there should be.
It's
And
It's
somebody suggested
creatively.
creativitless in this case. And somebody recommended Lol as a potential hunchback. And he was fantastic. Yeah, stuffed a pillow under his jumper and off we went. Yeah. So that's how I met him. But we had very similar sense of humor, I think, and that probably more than anything else was a kind of, we were kind of cynical about the world. Even then, we looked at the world and thought it was mad,
Really?
as many people did. But we
It's
took
true.
that madness and turned it into things,
So then,
and we loved it. We'd do all night sessions with him banging away on the piano and me writing lyrics. Find ourselves in his parents' front room at 9 o'clock in the morning without not having any, all the mad shit that you do when you're a kid, but focused on making stuff.
at the end of the day, you were always making
mostly
stuff.
music or ideas. Yeah, it was the driving force.
So then, how'd you guys get hooked up with Eric Stewart and start working at Strawberry Studios?
Eric was a sort of big light in Manchester. He'd been around. He'd been in a band called Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, and they'd had a few hits. They were one of the bands that came out of Manchester back in the day. But he got to a point in his life where he wanted to become a record producer.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there were no recording studios in that part of the world. The centre of the music business in the UK was in London, and that was it. He felt there should be some more local places where you can go and make records at a professional level. So his driving force after the Mindbenders folded was to do this. He partnered up with a guy, and they made it happen. They bought a premises in Stockport outside of Manchester and virtually by hand built it into a studio. Initially, it was like a 4-track studio. And we kind of knew everybody in the Manchester scene at the time. There weren't that many people, but he was one of the sort of the people that counted, along with Graham. And he asked myself and Lol if we could help him test the studio. He would mic up, I'd get, a set of proper drums in the studio, and he would mic them up and experiment about miking things up. And I would play and he'd record them just to test out the limited amount of equipment that Strawberry had at the time in its fledgling days. And the result of those sort of tentative sessions was some mad piece of shit called Neanderthal Man. Or it turned out to be called Neanderthal Man.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because after that song came out, it did.
I wouldn't call it a song. It was a
What would
thing.
You call it?
It was too creativitless to be a song.
But it did really well.
It got to number 2 in England. It was like, what the fuck happened?
And I wanted to ask, because you said before that after that song, it kills, gets to number 2. You said that you buy matching sports cars and go on vacation. I wanted to know, did you have any, when you came back, did you have any money left from that? Or did you just kind of blow it and you're like, oh, I'm back to zero now?
No, I don't think we had much money left at all.
So the sports cars is true. You did do that.
But I learned a very, very useful lesson. The sports car I got was a Lotus Plus 2S, which is a beautiful, sleek, white car made of fiberglass.
Where is that car now? Did you end up selling it?
It melted.
Melted?
How? I'll get to that. But I was sort of swanning around Manchester thinking, pop star. And I pulled into a garage to fill up with petrol. and promptly locked myself out of the car. And so, people are going past going, oh, there's Kevin Godley. He's locked himself out of his car. And I felt a real dick.
You felt like the Neanderthal man.
I felt, well, no, worse than the Neanderthal man. The word man didn't come into it, just a dick. Just a total dick. And don't get too full of yourself was the lesson from that. But yes, the car melted. I went on holiday with my soon-to-be wife in the south of France in the car, left it parked in the street for about 2 weeks, and it kind of melted.
Ooh.
It's made of fiberglass, and it was like... So I didn't get any more fiberglass cars after that. But I learned to be humble.
I've never seen a car melt. I had a family car explode once, but I have not seen a car melt. So that's the first.
Why did it explode?
It was wired. They actually ended up recalling it about like 2 months or something after our car exploded, but the front of it just like had like a little flame coming out. And I was playing a gig, actually. My parents brought me to play drums for this gig, and I was like, I think I see a flame. Is there a piece of grass in front of the car or something? And then within like 2 minutes, that little flame that was probably this high coming out of the hood of the car, the whole front half of the car was just like 25 foot high flames. I mean, I was 8, so I think it was like 25 feet. And I might be, have false memory, but it was pretty crazy. And then they didn't want to give us a new car.
So much for your insurance policy. Wow.
Yeah, my father went to the dealership and he said, it just lit on fire. And they were like, well, fuck you. That's a you problem. But it did turn out that they ended up getting one because the company found out that it was a wiring issue, and they recalled that whole section of cars. Oh. But look, my DW drums got out of the car, so that's all I care about. I was very happy. If I lost those, I think I would probably be working at some like office right now if that had happened.
Yeah. I can see that.
So then when you got back, were you concerned about the possibility at all that the gold that you kind of struck with Neanderthal Man, that might not happen again? Or was it by the time that you could have even had the time to think about that, you had already had something going? It was just kind of like a quick, blip on the radar. You were already onto something else.
Oh, we made an album, I think. Forgive me if I get the sort of timings mixed up. We made an album of music that sounded nothing like Neanderthal Man, which that wasn't a very clever thing to do because no one bought it. They were like Neanderthal Man, but this other stuff was nothing like Neanderthal Man. It was much less Neanderthal and far more creativity and sounded like we were trying to sound like the Beatles, I think, because it occurs to me, or has occurred to me over the years, that when you're young and you're trying to become something, either consciously or subconsciously, part of you is aping the people's work that you like because that is considered to be great. So if I sound like that, I'm going to be really good. We didn't, and that's what we kind of did. We made an album, a Hot Legs album. But I thought Neanderthal Man was, it's just a piece of fluff, piece of shit that just actually happened. The reality of the situation, we'd actually made something, whether you like it or not, that was quite original for its time, but we didn't understand what we'd made. So we set about trying to craft something way more musical and proper music, if you like, and it didn't work. It was only sort of much later in our musical meanderings we figured out what we really should be doing is not thinking so much and just letting stuff happen. Don't think about what you're trying to be and have an audible vision of where you're going. Just fucking do it. And if you do that, something original may happen en route. And I think that's true. You don't have an image in your mind of where you're going.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, when you get there, it won't be like that anyway.
How
But
was
don't hang on to trying to be like anybody else.
how was the morale after you released that album and it bombs? Were you guys like, well, it's
Yeah,
it's whatever. We'll do another one, or were you guys heartbroken, like that
no,
we're screwed?
no, we couldn't give a shit really. Because we were by that particular time when we took it on tour. We supported the Moody Blues for like 3 gigs or
Uh-huh.
something, and that was fun. What happened next was Strawberry Studios was doing quite well now. The notion of having a studio out in the sticks was kind of beginning to make some kind of sense because there were more and more people coming from the north of England and looking for places to go, which didn't involve them going to London or America. So people were booking into the studio, but there was no production unit there. So we became the house producers. And the house producers essentially it was the petri dish of 10cc. It was those four people. They were the house producers and the house band in one package. And we had all manner of stuff coming through the doors, but we were the people that made it happen.
And then you guys ended up
So
forming in what, 72, I think?
probably earlier. Yeah, I'd say from sort of 71 until the formation of the band, whenever that was. We were very, very busy playing sessions, producing sessions for anybody and everything that came through the door, from football teams to singers. It was crazy. Um, it was more like a Woody Allen film than it was like the music business. It was crazy.
Who came up with the idea, we're so good as a band for other people, why don't we just do this ourselves?
It was Neil Sedaka. We produced and were the house band for 2 albums with Neil. And at some point, he said, "Well, you guys play great together." That's one thing we didn't actually do much during those years was play together as a band.
Were you all tracking
We,
separately?
yeah, but we were all saying, "Well, why don't we try some echo on this? Why don't we run that sound through this thing?" We were producing, we were trying experimental ideas at the expense of other people's music, if you like. We were trying to be something, we didn't know what, but actually sitting down and just playing as a band didn't actually happen until we did those albums with Neil.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "You guys play great together. Why don't you form a band?" And we hadn't really thought of it. And so we said, okay, why not? So we recorded a couple of tracks and we sent one called Waterfall to Apple Corps, the Beatles version of Apple. And that was kind of the beginning of us as a band. They didn't release that particular track. It became a B-side for something we wrote in half an hour to help that along. But that was the start of the band. It's such a simple thing, isn't it? So we played together, we produced together. Why don't we become a band? Ding. Doesn't take a great deal of genius to come up with that, but it took somebody else to.
It's funny how sometimes it's the most obvious things that you don't see.
I think maybe we weren't looking for the obvious thing. Maybe.
It's an art that's a kind of an artistic mindset. Sometimes a lot of people, when they're so into the art that they're doing, they don't
Yeah.
they don't just see what's right in front of them. I feel like there's a lot of people who do that, so I don't think that's completely out
Yeah.
of the normal.
No, wood for the trees and all that stuff.
Yeah. So then, when the band really starts taking off, what was specifically your mentality once you had all this music coming out and it's doing well? Were you like, let's just focus on putting out as much music as possible, riding the wave, getting as much stuff out? We're really trying to keep this going, or were you just enjoying it? Like I'm gonna guess that it's the second one because of how your reaction to the other things were. But were you just like enjoying it? Like, man, this is clicking. I can go buy myself another sports car. I'm good.
Oh no. We were dedicated. Once there was a certain point, and I think it's when we got our first recording contract. We got a recording contract. And I don't think it was a great contract. But we were professionals. We were in the band, and the band had somehow started to do reasonably well. And we were having a great time. We were essentially studio people. We were essentially a group of people who flourished in the studio, and that was our domain. That was our place of work. We hadn't as yet really thought about performing live too much. It was really all about crafting records, and we did take on the mantle of the Beatles in terms of trying to create incredible pieces of sound. That was our goal. Um, and we had a ball. We loved it. The recording studio became the fifth member of the band. And the amazing thing was, because we were up north, away from the center of the music business, we didn't get record company executives dropping up to see us, dropping into the studio to see us, to see how we were getting on, how this track was working out, and saying things like, "You can't say fuck in the chorus." We didn't get that happening. Of course, you can't, not really. But we were of the chemistry was interesting, because it became evident after a while that there were two approaches going on simultaneously. Graham and Eric were much more, shall we say, professional and wedded to the idea of crafting perfect songs than myself and Lol were. We were art school kids who were prepared to try anything and everything to discover something that we didn't know existed yet. So it was the fusion of those two things in the Petri dish that made 10cc sound like it did. And that was fun.
And then you and Law
That was a blast.
started working as directors while you were still with 10cc, right?
No, that didn't happen for a long time after.
Okay.
That didn't happen until 1980 something.
So that was okay. I don't know why I thought that you guys had done some before. So is it you guys end up leaving after How Dare You in '76? Was the idea was the idea that when we leave, we're staying together? We're gonna, no matter what, we're gonna go right into another project together, or did that just kind of happen?
No, we'd already started another project. Well, I think what happened was we were doing really well by then. You know, we'd had 3 albums out, I think, by then. The original soundtrack had "I'm Not in Love" on it, and that was a big hit everywhere. So we were doing well, and we were touring, and we were a business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had responsibilities, and we had a contract, and we were expected to churn out, but record so many albums in a certain amount of time, and to tour the albums. And it was becoming a little bit predictable, you know, the way things do.
Mm-hmm.
And Lol and I had invented a device back in the days of even, I think it was during the Hot Legs period, around 1969 or something, called the Gizmotron, we called it, because we wanted to work with strings with an orchestra, but we couldn't afford to pay an orchestra to come to the studio, and there weren't any good ones in Manchester at the time. And those that did exist used to break every 10 minutes for a cup of tea, and they didn't understand rock music. So we thought, well, you know, the guitar is a string instrument. Why can't it be played like a violin? So we invented this gadget that did that. But we'd never really, in the context of any of the bands we'd been in, had an opportunity to really put it through its paces. So there was a point where we'd come off the road and we were due to start thinking and preparing for the next album, which was due to be How Dare You. So Lol and I booked a little bit of time at Strawberry to test this thing out, see what it was capable of. And we got lost on it. You know, it was delivering something that the band wasn't. It was delivering a kind of freedom that was completely separate from the band. And we thought, well, why don't we do something, record an album or something? Just to see how far we can take it. And when that's done, we'll come back and we'll pick up where we left off with the band, and we'll learn something new and bring it back to the band.
And that album ended up being Consequences, right?
Yes, or con sequences, as I tend to call it. But yeah, it was very creativity-less time in our career. We got lost in it. Essentially, we got lost in it, and we got lost in it because the band's schedule, the band's business, was demanding that we couldn't spend a certain amount of time on this project. We had to come back to NCC because it was time to record a new album. And Eric and Graham had already written a couple of songs for it, and it was that moment where we had to go in and listen to what they'd done and start thinking about how we were going to put a new 10cc album together. And we did. We listened, and we weren't excited by what they'd written at all.
Mm-hmm.
We said, listen, we're not excited. We're not ready. We're not ready to begin this process. Can we just kind of pause for a bit until we finish this thing? Because we're learning a lot. And we weren't smart as a unit, as a band or a business. We weren't smart enough to recognize the value of having that break. And we weren't mature enough to recognize that. No, you have to make a decision, you two guys. Are you in the band or are you not in the band? And it was like, what the fuck? And we were still young guys, and we were having a whale of a time. We felt we'd hit a new kind of creative vein and wanted to follow that. And we were a little bit blasé about being who we were, probably at the time, and perhaps a little bit overconfident. But we said, "Fuck it, we're going to do this, whether you like it or not." And we left the band.
And then how did you make that?
And carried on doing.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Sorry. No.
I was gonna say, how did you make that transition? So then you end up leaving the band, and then you're Godley and Creme, the group. How does it then become we're now directing music videos? Who was the first person that hired you to do that?
Oh, that didn't happen for ages. I mean, we went through the whole Consequences. That I think that was between 14 and 18 months worth of studio time, and we emerged like a Japanese soldier coming out of the forest at the end of the Second World War, not knowing what the fuck was going on. Punk had come out of nowhere. A new wave was there. We hadn't been listening. We were still making sort of music that belonged on Indian carpets, and was so. It was our version of what was that film? A Western film that came out. It was a great film, but it was a complete flop because the timing was so wrong. I can't remember. It'll come to me at some point. But we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what happened. We made a piece of work that we thought was very interesting and different, but the record company, to get their investment back, overpriced it. It became sort of iconic, packaged, very expensive triple album, sold for the ridiculous price of something like £12, which was insane. And they held an enormous party to launch it in Amsterdam. And it was hubris. The whole thing was hubris, and it was overblown and totally invalid for the point in time that we were at. We were still selling something that was precious and wonderful and a work of art when music had hit the streets again. We were in the wrong place at the wrong time, as I said before, and it bombed. That was pretty traumatic. Meanwhile, Eric and Graham were carrying on as 10cc and doing rather well. So we still had a record contract, and we went back to basics. We started recording music again on 16-track studio, costing not a great deal of money. And we were doing quite well. But at some point, in that period of time, some short piece of the music from Consequences was picked up for a cinema commercial for Benson and Hedges cigarettes and used as a piece of sound for an existing film, which was great. And the film was great, made by Hugh Hudson, directed by Hugh Hudson, who shot Chariots of Fire. And we were then being sort of introduced to a new way of music and pictures working together. Not that there was anything called a music video back then, but it was the combination of those two elements sort of ticked a few boxes up here. And then not too long after that, we recorded a track called An Englishman in New York, not the Sting song, our own version. And we weren't a touring band, so we didn't really know how to promote it other than to make a little film for it, which we suggested to the label. And they said, yes, by all means, but you can't direct it because you haven't a clue how to direct anything, which was true. We really didn't. So we were teamed up with the director and who shot An Englishman in New York, but we learned an incredible amount of what film was and how the pairing of sound and pictures was incredible. And in that one day of shooting, we made total nuisances of ourselves because we were suggesting things. Well, it's great, but can't we put the camera over there? And if I stood like this and you put the camera down there, and it would just leave it to me. But in all seriousness, we were treated very well and we were allowed to learn from what was going on. And we were very heavily involved in the editing process. We had no idea that you could actually do what editing could do, because this was video editing and there were all sorts of effects that you could do, and we went crazy. What happens if you touch this button and pull this lever and do this? And we were on fire, a big light bulbs going on.
So it reignited.
And the finished thing is like a mess of effects all over the show. But people in the business kind of felt that we'd done it. It was directed officially by somebody else, but our dirty little fingers were all over it. And Steve Strange, who just signed a contract for Visage with Polydor, came to us because we knew Steve from the clubs around London at the time. We were living in London by now, and asked if we'd be interested in shooting his first video. That was our first gig. I think the budget was £5,000, half of which went to the makeup artist. The track was called Fade to Grey.
So you probably lost money on that one, right?
Well, we didn't make any. Let's put it that. I think it probably, but that was our first gig as directors, and the record was a hit.
It's amazing.
And it was like, and suddenly other people were coming to us, asking us to do, we hooked up with Duran Duran and Graham Parker and numerous people. And we didn't understand why that was happening, but it became obvious after a while. Most of the people at that period of time that were directing videos came from television or advertising or features or documentary makers. None of them, not one person, came from music. So there's a sort of disconnect in consciousness between a musician trying to get an idea across and the person trying to deliver that idea. I think at the time, people enjoyed working with us because we were musicians. We understood the basic elements of what people were trying to do and trying to say, and we come up with ideas that were appropriate for that.
And then you end up working with the Police, and Sting says, "Oh, An Englishman in New York. Maybe I'm going to steal that for myself."
That was later, wasn't it? I think he'd already left the band by then. That was much later.
Yeah, well, he heard about it while he was in the police, and then it went into the back of his
Yeah,
brain, and now
bastard.
you're owed
How dare he?
so many. You have so many royalties that are just sitting there. You just got to get ready.
Okay.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to say? Anything you want to push? Anything at all?
No, I'm just kind of curious to understand why America is so fucked up at the moment.
I don't know. I'm here, but I'm doing this. What kind of
I don't know. It's just mad. It's just mad. It's like maybe we didn't get to have any proper arguments face to face when COVID was kicking off. Let's really get down to business. Let's find some more shit to disagree on.
I sit here and I book people for this show, and then I edit the clips from the show, and then I do the show. So I am not the person to have a really valid opinion on American politics and discussion and creativity-livetiness.
That's a good thing to talk about.
Exactly.
It's just insane. It just seems to me that last year we were all incredibly worried about NFTs and crypto. And this year it's all artificial intelligence. And left and right politics. It's going to be 24 is going to be an interesting year.
For sure.
With your election coming up, it's going to be
an interesting
mad fucking year. Yeah.
Come visit.
That's gonna be fun.
Visit the States and see it in person.
No. No.
Well, if there's
I don't want to be infected.
Well, you can enjoy yourself in Ireland, but I'm stuck here.
Okay.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who watched. Kevin, would you mind sticking around for 1 second after I turn the stream off?
Not at all.
Like 10 seconds. Thank you all for watching. We're going to be live next week at it's a weird time. It's going to be 3 p.m. Eastern time with Billy Cobham, Mahavishnu's Billy Cobham. I'm very excited. Thank you all for watching. I'm going to click the goodbye button now. I'll see you guys later.